want to welcome Daniel Gordis to Thinking Aloud. Daniel Gordis is the Koret Distinguished Fellow at Shalem College. He's the author of 13 books and the widely read blog podcast, Israel from the Inside. Gordis' History of Israel, Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, received the 2016 National Jewish Book Award as Book of the Year. Ambassador Dennis Ross, reflecting on the book, wrote, "When I am asked, is there one book to read about Israel, I now have an answer." Gordis' writing has appeared in magazines and newspapers, including the New York Times, the New Republic, the New York Times Magazine, Azur, Commentary Magazine, Time, and Foreign Affairs. In 2014, the Jerusalem Post listed him as one of the world's 50 most influential Jews, while Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic has written, "If you ask me of all the people you know, who cares the most about the physical, moral, and spiritual health of Israel, I would put the commentator and scholar Daniel Gordis at the top of the list." Gordis' most recent book, Impossible Takes Longer, 75 years after its creation, Has Israel Fulfilled Its Founders' Dreams, was published in 2023. Gordis and his wife live in Jerusalem. They have 3 married children and several grandchildren. On a totally personal note, oftentimes I credit the writing and the teachings of Danny Gordis for influencing me to become a professional Jew, to transition from being a passionate Jew to a professional Jew. And I cherish our relationship and our coffees together in Baca. And God willing, we'll get a chance to do it again sometime soon. Danny, welcome to the show. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Nolan. Thanks for having me.
Let's go back to the very beginning of this entire nightmare. The morning of Shabbat HaShachor, Simchas Torah. How did that day begin to unfold for you?
We were in shul, as not professional Jews, but passionate Jews. And we daven outside. We've been davening outside ever since COVID got started. We obviously had to be outside for the obvious reasons. And some of us just discovered that we liked it. And so we've stayed outside. And then there was too many people. So there's a little early minyan. So we go to shul 7:30 in the morning. We get out at 9. And then the next minyan comes in at 9 and does their thing. And we started to hear booms about 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock in the morning. We heard these booms very far away. And, you get used to it here periodically. Something gets fired, something gets shot down. It's a little bit of a boom. You think that's kind of crazy, but all right. But it was going on and on and on. It felt very far away, but it was very audible, and it was not stopping. And people began to look at each other and said, what exactly is going on? So it's Shabbat. Obviously, nobody has phones or any other electronics. So you're kind of cut off from the world, and you're guessing what's going on out there. And a friend of mine actually came up to me and said, "It's construction. I'm sure it's construction," which was, of course, ludicrous because there's no construction on Shabbat. So I said, "There's no construction on Shabbat." And Israel goes, "Well, it's Arabs doing construction." I was like, "Okay, it's not Arabs doing construction." But nobody was really very worried. It was clearly something, but nobody was really terribly worried. And then sometime in the middle of the davening, we were actually reading Torah, sirens went off. And we daven right outside a gymnasium, which is where we go when it's very cold or rainy or whatever. So everybody automatically started to grab everything and move into the gymnasium. But then somebody remembered that the miklat, the bomb shelter, is actually not in the gymnasium building. It's in a smaller building at the other side of the courtyard. So everybody quickly reversed, and nobody was very panicked. It was like, okay, we go in, and everybody was really in a totally fine mood. Nobody was very worried. We had our kids with us, and somebody brought the Torah in, and we opened it up on a table, and we continued reading Torah. And we finished Torah reading, and we went back outside, and we're doing our thing. And then the siren went off again. And then it was pretty clear that something was up. And we went back into the shelter. We finished Musaf. We finished davening. And then somebody announced, because it was Simchat Torah, somebody announced, we're going to continue the dancing afterwards, because it's Simchat Torah, obviously, is the same day as Shmini Atzeret here in Israel. And the 2 minyanim, even though there's an early one and a late one, they decided to do the hakafot together. So we do ours after, so we can dance with everybody else. And somebody said, well, we're going to, as usual, get together with the late minyan, and we'll do the hakafot in a little while. And somebody said, no, the late minyan already disbanded and went home. And that was the first inkling that any of us had. Wow, what does somebody there know that we don't know? And because it's a mixed neighborhood, and you have friends, and everybody knows at a certain point what's going on. A lot of people actually did turn on their phones because they were getting very nervous and very scared, and the sirens kept going off in the afternoon, so people were just beginning to say, you got to turn on your phone. So people did. And the rumors were couple terrorists broke into a kibbutz, which is the nightmare. The nightmare scenario is what's called the chadira. They break into the perimeter of the kibbutz, and God knows what they can do in a kibbutz. Then there was a rumor they grabbed a hostage and went back to Gaza. That made no possible sense. How could they grab a hostage and go back to Gaza? Anyway, so obviously over the course of the day, as things unfolded, we began to understand that it was, as you put it, Hashabbat Hashchora. I mean, really the blackest of black Shabbatot. And obviously, 2,000 terrorists, 2,500 terrorists, nobody knows exactly. We killed, I think, 1,500 in Israel. But a lot of them got back, obviously, and 1,400 people killed. Stories of both bravery but horror at the same time. And we're talking 3 weeks after this got started, a little bit more after 3 weeks than this got started. When I hold my 2-year-old grandson there, they've more or less moved in with us because his father's been called up, and it's a mess. And I took him out for a walk today. He's so clingy now. He's so upset. He can tell he's only 2 something, but he can tell something's wrong. We don't watch news in front of him. And, his father comes home with a big gun periodically. I don't think he knows what a gun is. So I don't think he just can tell we're trying to be as normal as we can. And if you put him down for 2 seconds, he shrieks. And he's just so clingy. And okay, he's got it right. But then I think, what about the kids who are basically just a few months older than him, who've been in captivity without their parents now for 3 weeks? I mean, it's the cruelty is simply mind-boggling. And I guess I'll say we'll come back to where you want to go, but I'll just say that son came home for Shabbos, and we had all the papers, Haaretz, Mokar Rishon, Yediot, splayed out all over the living room. And he looked at the papers for a minute when he got home, and he said, "Wow, I never really put this together, but the country and the army are entirely different places. The country is still in Hashabbat Hashchora. The newspapers are all still about all the horror stories. The guy that got gunned down with the engagement ring that he was planning to give, to his fiance to be that day. The men and women who defended these kibbutzim in lion-like courage, fiercely, many of them alive, but tragically, many of them not. Those are the stories that the papers are all full of. Who died, which kids are in captivity, which parents, the horror stories. And he said in the army at this point, even though that was the focus at the very beginning, because we're just human beings, the army is all now about fixing this, about getting rid of Hamas. It's not looking back, it's looking forward. And he said there's a way in which the army and the country are actually in very, very different places. But we really much are, I think, emotionally stuck where we were 3 weeks ago.
The American Jewish community has mobilized in a way that I have not seen in my lifetime.
Right.
I think it is unfortunately one of our proudest moments, and I also think it's one of our most daunting, scary moments. We preach here that we must continue to support Israel. It was easy to support Israel on October 8th. It's far more difficult to support Israel on November 8th, more difficult to support Israel on December 8th, and it has to remain steadfast. In Israel, as the weeks go by, and the more and more stories come out about the horror of the terrorist attack on October 7th, of the brutality and the savage nature of the atrocities, does it feel as though the appetite for war is growing, that Israel understands it kind of sits in the center of this global story, that everyone in the world has eyes on it? Does it understand its role in kind of world Jewry at this moment in terms of fallout, in terms of support, in terms of all of it? Or is it just focused plainly on families that have been irreparably torn apart?
It's something in the middle. I think, first of all, Israelis, of course, understand that this is a potentially widespread geopolitical issue, with the United States aligning itself on one side and Russia and China aligning themselves on the other. Obviously, Hamas is just Iran. And obviously Hezbollah is just Iran. And I think what's changed in Israel is we are no longer going to live under that threat. The notion that we can build a better bunker, a better Iron Dome, a better fence, that's all been shot to hell, obviously. And I think what's changed here is, no, the enemies have to be eradicated. We're not going to live with them at our side. So now we're going to take care of Hamas. Hezbollah is a much more formidable challenge. I don't think anybody wants to open up a second front right now if we can help it, but there's thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers in the north in case. Iran's got to get taken care of. Can't live this way. It just can't go on. And so there's been a complete 180-degree change in the thinking of Israelis, and I'm assuming in the top brass and the whatever's left of the government as well. So yes, everybody here understands that it's potentially a regional or much wider conflict. We're hoping it doesn't become that, but everybody understands that the world is very much watching this. Now, does Israel understand its obligation, or I forget how you put it, to American Jews? Israel feels very supported by American Jews. Israel feels, first of all, supported by President Biden. I mean, that's been unbelievable, just unbelievable. And it was so obviously he was speaking from the heart. When he was talking about, he lost a son, he lost a wife. I mean, he's had a complicated personal life that we wouldn't wish on people that we care about. And when he talked about this black hole in your chest and it feels like it's going to suck everything in, that wasn't telepromptery. That was just the human being, Joe Biden, really being him. And everybody here understood that. So Israelis are unbelievably, left and right, by the way, are very, 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 and people that were sort of poo-pooing the United States are no longer poo-pooing the United States. They do understand, of course, that comes with a price tag. And the price tag is the United States also gets to tell us what to do and what not to do. Just today, for example, and I think quite rightly, Joe Biden said to people, you got to rein in the maniacs on the West Bank, some Jewish fringe nationalist maniacs who are doing some pretty horrible things. Normally you would think, okay, like, all right, what's the deal? I mean, you're the president of the United States. Bibi is the prime minister of Israel. Not a great one, but he is one. Leave us alone. But there's no such thing anymore. He will tell us how long we can stay in Gaza. Probably they will tell us what we can do in Lebanon. You don't get to have 2 aircraft carriers off of your coast for free. It just doesn't. And Israelis understand that too. So Israelis, first of all, are grateful to Biden. The second thing that Israelis are grateful for is the tremendous outpouring of support from American Jews. There's just no question. Everybody understands it. Everybody appreciates it. It's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. It's not wall to wall, as you well know. I mean, not all the rabbinate is where you are. And what's going on campuses, including among Jews, is pretty reprehensible. It's reprehensible when the Jews in Cooper Union have to blockade themselves in the library because they're scared. And it's reprehensible when Jewish Voice for Peace, which is neither about Jewish or about peace, but it is a voice, says what it says. And there's all kinds of really sick stuff coming out. I mean, my own personal view is that the statement issued by Truah was disgusting. And if you kind of do a very close analysis of the text, it was really, really problematic. And Israelis are appalled by what's happening on American campuses, and they're appalled by what's happening with anti-Semitism in America. They're less aware of that fringe of the American Jewish community, which is not a small fringe, which is the not in my name thing. But they're feeling very supported. Having said that, Nolan, Israel is not going to do a single thing or not do a single thing because of what it's going to make life easier or harder for American Jews. Everybody understands, this is our second war of independence. If we lose this, we die. This is actually a war for the existence of Israel. Because if we can't defeat Hamas and eradicate it, no matter what the cost, no matter what the cost. And I was just before we got on, there was a whole discussion. I was watching TV. A whole discussion. We know what's under Al Shifa Hospital. We know what's there. And the question was, how much of the hospital has to be evacuated before we bomb it? Now, if that happens, and nobody talks to me, obviously, it's going to look very ugly, and it's going to get uncomfortable for American Jews, and Israelis aren't going to care, because this is not about making anybody happy. It's about staying alive. We are really fighting for our lives here. If we can't defeat Hamas, then Hezbollah will smell blood. And it'll be bad. It'll be really horrific. So this is going to be a long haul. It's going to get very ugly. The pictures from Gaza are going to make people very upset. And just ask yourself, if you're an American Jew and you don't like those pictures, ask yourself, what did Mosul look like when the United States decided to wipe out ISIS? Ask yourself what Germany and parts of Europe looked like when the United States decided to wipe out the Nazis. And I don't want to make an ISIS a Hamas analogy. I don't want to make a Nazi Hamas analogy. I just want to say there is a huge double standard here. Nobody has any idea how many innocent Iraqis were killed in the attack on Mosul, but it was clearly tens of thousands, probably close to 50,000. 80,000 people we know were killed. The question is how many of them were ISIS fighters? 20,000, 30,000? I don't have any idea, but probably 50,000 people were killed. What did the United States not hit in trying to destroy ISIS? American Jews, and I understand that it's going to get uncomfortable, and I understand that the press works differently, and social media didn't exist certainly in the Second World War, and it's even very different than it was during the ISIS period because it's just increased exponentially even in a few years. But that's the question you have to ask yourself. This is Pearl Harbor, and what did the United States do to Europe? What did the United States do to Germans? And how many Americans actually who really cared about America were sitting there saying, I'm uncomfortable with the number of dead Germans that there are? Of course you're uncomfortable with it. What kind of human being isn't uncomfortable with it? But we have to decide, are we going to survive or we're not going to survive? And we really couldn't care less what anybody else thinks about what we should do.
I've been looking over my library over the last 3 weeks, looking for things to read and things to teach here in synagogue. This book, of course, your book, Israel: A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, is not only a must read. I assign it to each and every one of my conversion candidates, and I had to bring it from home because my children are reading it at home right now.
I don't think my children have, so good for you.
But it feels in so many ways like American Jews were, and again, I don't want to say ill-prepared because Israel was clearly ill-prepared for October 7th. We were ill-prepared psychologically, educationally for October 7th because we were still reading Yossi Klein Halevi's Letter to My Palestinian Neighbor. We were still reading Mika Goodman's Catch 67. We were still reading, and if you read those books, it feels like we're very close. Like we're very close. We're very close to living peacefully with our neighbors. I just came back from Abu Dhabi and Dubai this past summer. It felt like we were very close, and all we had to do was kind of reconcile the 6-day war, the winnings of the 6-day war, which was, of course, a defensive victory, and we would have peace in our time. And October 7th taught us that we were never living in 67. We're always living in 47.
Right.
So how does that reverse the thinking and the voices that we hear coming out of Israel today? And is that a realization that Israelis feel in their kishkes, that they're living again in 1947, fighting for the very notion that Jews belong on our ancestral homeland, and we can afford to live there safely?
Yeah. So about Gaza, there's nothing to talk about, right? I mean, Hamas has to get wiped out, and the price will be what the price will be. It is. There's been a lot of pro-Hamas protests on the West Bank. So before everybody starts distinguishing, oh, that's Hamas and that's the Palestinian, the Palestinian Authority exists because Israel props it up. If Israel didn't prop up Mahmoud Abbas, it would be Hamas over there as well. And then there's been all these discussions on Israeli TV, and somebody said, yeah, but Hamas is more religious and more religiously motivated, and the Palestinian Authority is more nationally motivated. And then what everybody says is, yeah, but I don't really care when the person slits my throat, if he slits my throat because of religious reasons or nationalist reasons. I think what this has done is, look, Yossi is a very close friend of mine. I mean, we're really very dear friends. And the book is in his book about letters to a Palestinian friend is like poetry. I mean, it's not poetry, but it's like poetry. And it's just, that's how he writes. I mean, he's the most lyrical prose writer that I know, or among them, certainly. And I think that for all of us, part of the heartbreak of this is we are no. That's all back to ground zero. I mean, that's just all gone. I don't think the idea, when Joe Biden does say, by the way, but we have to still work on the two-state solution, I think people here say, okay, fine. Yeah, okay. You just go ahead and think that. Whatever you think, maybe you just say that for public consumption. I don't have any idea. Look, I don't have any idea what's going to happen here. I don't know who's going to be prime minister in 6 months. I don't know if we're going to be at peace in 6 months. I don't know if we're going to be at war at 6 months. I don't know if we're going to be fighting Lebanon. I don't know if we're going to be fighting Iran. I don't have any idea what's going to be here. I don't know how many of us are going to still get killed. I don't know anything, but what I do know is that Israelis have been woken up in a very, very, very profound way. And if we wanted to pretend that the Hamas charter was just a bunch of verbiage because they like to toot their horn, you have to understand that they were very, very serious about it. They said that Israel has to be destroyed. It's important to recognize that X number of years after he's come into office, 15, 16, 17, 18 years, whatever it is, Mahmoud Abbas has never said that Israel has a right to exist. And so Israelis are now going to stop playing games. And Israelis are not going to be terribly concerned. By the way, who did they slaughter? Who was at the concert on October 7th? It wasn't the right wing, because the right is mostly more traditional, mostly more religious. It was Shabbat and it was Yom Tov. Who was there? It was the left. It was the peaceniks, right? And their children were raped, and their children were slaughtered, and their children had their arms blown off. I mean, that's it. I would assume that the peace movement in Israel is very, very dead. And then one can say, well, how long can you keep this thing going? For a very long time. Because I think what Israelis have come to understand is we thought we had, by having a high-tech, startup nation and relations. I was also in Dubai. I was also in Bahrain, in Abu Dhabi, and all that. Yes, it's all very interesting. It's a lot of kosher restaurants. It's pretty cool. You can go to daven. You can go to shul, right? In Dubai on Shabbat. That's where I was for Shabbat. It's crazy. It's amazing. It's very thin. Very thin. They're not Zionists, right? But we convince ourselves that because of this startup nation, which is what they want, of course, they want the technology and the anti-Iran axis, that we had really kind of moved Israel to Europe. We still spoke Hebrew and we still ate shawarma, but we effectively moved Israel to Europe. And the answer is no. Israel still lives in the jungle. And if you want to survive in the jungle, you have to live like you're in the jungle. And at a certain point, people are just going to have to get used to this. This is what it is. And it's very sad. It's heartbreaking, but I don't think Yossi would write that book right now. I think Micha Goodman's going to be writing very different books. If you've been listening to Micha over the last few weeks, here's a situation where people like Yossi and Micha, who like me also, by the way, I mean, really did want this to be an area that was different. I think we're all just, first of all, enraged and heartbroken, and then we're frightened, and not for our personal safety, although who knows. But for the country that next to our family is the most important thing in our lives. We're fighting to survive here. And the Palestinian thing is going to sink in the order of priorities. The Palestinian issue is going to rise in the priority of how do we keep them unarmed and not a problem. That's all anybody's going to care about here now.
I often try to describe October 7th to both my non-Jewish neighbors as well as, let's say, Jews who are not as associated with the Jewish people or the Jewish community. I try to explain to them that October 7th was Kristallnacht or Babi Yar, or a moment that we haven't seen in generations and generations. We always assumed would be in black and white. We've always seen it as still photos in black and white in a textbook that we never thought would come back. Except this time it was in color, and the videos were beamed into my pocket.
Right.
My kids watched
by the people who were perpetrating it.
By the people who are perpetrating them. Right.
Right. The Nazis at least had the dignity to try to hide the evidence.
Right. Right. I mean, the Hamas, terrorists, they videoed it on GoPros. They took the cell phones off the victims. We now have voicemails and recordings of them calling their parents, bragging about how many Jews murdered. And with all of this evidence in front of the world, it seems as though either people don't care or people just refuse to believe it. One or the other.
People hate the Jews.
Where people's anti-Semitism is in fact that deep, that profound, that they can't.
I think it is.
That they can't look past it. And if we're looking back to 80, we're not looking back to, if we're looking back past 75 years ago, in 1947, and we're looking back to 80 years ago, 85 years ago, 90 years ago, battling the kind of anti-Semitism that was so virulent and so vitriolic and pervasive in the world. Now we have a state of Israel. We have an IDF. We have all of these instruments that we have created and that we have inherited from generations who sacrificed to build it. How do you think it plays out differently, fighting with these kinds of tools at our disposal, as opposed to a Jewish people that kind of had to figure out how to rebuild itself in the wake of a Bal Yar?
Look, we do have, I mean, the fact that the war is happening now is all the difference, right? Because in the past, when you attacked the Jews and slaughtered them, the Jews just bandaged themselves up and hoped it didn't happen again very soon. And there wasn't anything you could do. So as horrible as this is, look, the state failed here. I mean, the state failed. The Zionism had one purpose. This was supposed to be the place where that couldn't happen. And that happened. Intelligence failed. The army failed. Defense failed. Everything failed. The government's still failing. In terms of protecting citizens and taking care of Israel. We have 200,000 internal, what do you call them? Refugees in Israel, right? 200,000 people. We have no schools near the Dead Sea where we've moved 10, 50,000, I think 40,000 school-age kids. No schools. I mean, we're not prepared for this. And there's no way that we should have had schools built there. But my point is that the government is not working. So a lot of things didn't work. And this, you mentioned the new book, right? 75 years after its creation, as Israel lived up to its founders' dreams, in this particular way, this one particular way, no. It failed its founders' dreams. The founders' dreams was a place where Jews wouldn't get slaughtered. Israel became a place where Jews got slaughtered. So look, I mean, is it comforting to have an army? Yes, it's comforting to have an army. Is it comforting to have an army which your own son is at war? No, it's not comforting to have an army which your own son is at war, even as you and I are having this conversation. But we're better off than we were 75 years ago, but we're not nearly as better off as we should have been. And we're not as well off as I think we'll be in 10, 15 years when we fix this thing and build it, but it's going to be a very long haul. But I think it's important to say, by the way, I'm guessing that at VBS, you have a little bit of security, right?
A lot, yeah.
Right. And I'm guessing if you will go down Ventura Boulevard to some of the churches, they have no security.
None.
Right. So that just tells you that this is not only limited to Israel. This is a pervasive worldwide thing. There's no mosques in them. I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that mosques do not have significant amount of security. But every Jewish day school now does. I would imagine most synagogues are armed to the teeth. I was at a synagogue as a scholar in residence not that long ago, where in addition to the security guards at the doors and all of this, there was a plainclothes security guy assigned to the rabbi. Like, when the rabbi would walk around, he would kind of like not walk with him, but he was there in case somebody tried to grab him. I was like, whoa, that's kind of nuts. But obviously necessary because it's a shul run by very smart people who take their responsibilities very seriously. So look, this is a pervasive world problem. And if we convinced ourselves for a certain time that the world had stopped hating the Jews, then I think we were fools. And by the way, I mean, I was part of that too. I remember. This goes back way, 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 way long time ago. But when I was in my teens, my savta, my grandmother, who would come to America in 1908, I think at the age of 10, or 1910 at the age of 8, I always get those two confused, but that was about it. This was probably in the 70s. So she was in her 70s, and she was born around 1900. And I was in high school, and I was in a public school. Public high school was 90% Jewish because of where I lived, and she would occasionally, not often, but she'd occasionally say something about, the goyim. She had fled pogroms. Her mother had taken her, scooped her up, and they'd fled pogroms. And that never left her. And I would say, Savta, you don't understand. I didn't know much about what happened back then because as a kid, you're never interested enough. And as you're an adult, it's too late to ask, unfortunately. But I said, Savta, it's not like that anymore. Like the world doesn't hate the Jews anymore. We're here in Baltimore. I mean, look around. People don't hate us anymore. And she always used to say, "You're so cute." Now I wasn't cute anymore. I was like 16 or 17. What she meant to say was, "You're an idiot." But I'm your savta, so I'm not going to call you an idiot. But I was an idiot. And when the time comes that I go on high, if she and I meet up, I have to say to her, you actually were right. The world, the anti-Semitism is a sick but pervasive dysfunction of humanity and it's taken on very different forms. And kids are getting beaten up at Harvard, and kids at Cooper Union are blockading themselves in the library, and here, at Shalem College, where I'm sitting right now, a lot of the women students who live with their husbands are now all having sleepovers because their husbands are all called up to war. I mean, each of us in our own way is experiencing something that we all pretended had gone away or wanted to believe had gone away, and it didn't.
So you're one of the, I don't know, foremost speakers, thinkers that translate to Israel for American Jewry. Where's the challenge in your mind? The next thing that you're writing, the next thing that you're preparing is a presentation. Where do we go from here? Because it feels like, we're fighting, and the fight is in the forefront. But behind the fight, there has to be inspiration, explanation. There has to be the beginnings, the germination of an idea of the next book, the next article, the next. How do you begin to connect American Jewry that's so separated away from the massacres of October 7th, back to the thrust for Zionism again?
I think we have to do it ourselves here first. I think Israelis have to have that conversation. I mean, we'll talk about American Jews in a second, but I think we have to have the Arthur Hertzberg Zionist idea conversation again. I mean, why are we here? If we can't keep ourselves safe, then what was the point of the country? I mean, really, maybe safety is not the purpose. Maybe the purpose is the kind of flowering of Judaism that we see here in a way that can't even begin to be described. But look, if we can't keep ourselves safe, too many people are not going to stay. I mean, I did not buy this business that during the judicial reform, all those people that said that they were going to leave. They might have left if the country really became non-democratic in some kind of meaningful way. But I wasn't worried that anybody was going to leave then. But if in a year we are still battling Hamas, and in a year they're still firing rockets at us, and in a year Hezbollah can still do whatever they're doing, a lot of people are going to say, I care about the Jewish people, and this was a noble idea, but I just don't want my children growing up. I mean, I saw in the paper yesterday, a 9-year-old girl died of a heart attack. The siren went off. Her family took her to the shelter. She had a heart attack. She died. She survived for a few days, and then she died. People aren't going to raise their kids when 9-year-olds are having heart attacks. They're just not going to do it. I mean, I've seen my own 2-year-old grandson when in the houses that have mamads. So it's just a room, and we put toy cars in there, and we call it the car room. But in the building that they live in Givatayim, they don't have a safe room, and there's no shelter in the building, and nobody in their right mind is going to go running outside to go to the neighborhood shelter. So they hide in the stairwell at the bottom. He's petrified. He doesn't know exactly why they're running, but he knows that everybody's running. Can you see that everybody's scared? And who's going to raise their kids that way? So, I mean, the first thing we have to do is have a conversation here about why are we here? What are we doing here? What does the state owe its citizens in order for the citizens to want to be part of it? It's like, it's political science 101, right? People leave the state of nature and they bond together in certain groups. Why? Not to build startups. They bond together in groups, little groups of cavemen, to keep themselves safe from other groups of cavemen who are going to steal their wheat or their fruit or their whatever. I mean, it's obviously hyper simplified, but that's the first conversation that we have to have. Look, in terms of them describing it, I was sitting in shul Friday night next to a person who I won't name, but is one of the, if you think of the 3 or 4 people who are the main authors that American Jews read about Israel, well, he was one of them. And I said, what are you writing? Same question you asked me. And he said, I am planting strawberries. He said, I just can't. I have nothing to say. And I sit at the computer and I end up following Twitter and my blood pressure goes up. So he said, I'm going. And actually, that's what we're doing this week too. My son and I are going down. My son, not the one in the army, are going to go down and start preparing, going agricultural stuff, because it's just much healthier to actually do what people did here in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and remind ourselves we really are rebuilding this place from the very beginning, and people need help. I don't know what the next book is. I have no idea. I am too heartbroken to think about an idea. I mean, talking to you is a wonderful, well, first of all, it's always wonderful to talk to you, but I mean, it's also an opportunity just to get away from the news. And that's what we do all day long is watch the news, look at our phones, look at our watches, look at our screens, look at our TVs. It's completely ossifying, and it's emasculating in the sense that I have no idea what I would ever write. I don't want to write a negative thing about how we failed. That other people will do that. That's not going to be me. So maybe I won't write any more books. That's fine. I was actually talking before this. I mean, had nothing to do with this. Yeah, done enough and want to retire and take things easy, play with my grandchildren. Um, so whatever I'm doing now with the blog and trying to sort of share what's going on in Israel, if anything, it's just for my own catharsis. I mean, I could sit around and watch TV, or I can sit around and watch TV and then try to explain what it is that we're seeing and feeling. But I don't know if it does any good. But I don't know. I don't know what the big ideas. I don't know what the big ideas are. But I would say, and this is not a new idea, and I'm not going to write a book about this, but this is going to be a very long haul, very long, and very ugly. And American Jews just have to understand that this is the War of Independence. You just weren't alive for the first one. This is the War of Independence. And again, the same thing we said earlier in the conversation. What did the United States do to defeat ISIS? What did the United States do to defeat the Nazis? That's what we're going to do. And nobody questioned them. And other people shouldn't be questioning us. And you certainly, American Jews, should not be questioning us, even when the pictures in the LA Times are really ugly, and they're going to get really ugly. We're fighting for our lives. It's going to take a long time.
Danny, I'm going to end the conversation the same way that I end the conversation with all of our Israeli friends, and we have Israeli friends who are suffering beyond children who are kidnapped in Gaza. We have Israeli friends who are just in their homes in Jerusalem and their homes throughout the country. We have family who are trying to raise young children at this time on Zoom, back on Zoom schools, and let me call with all of them just by reminding you that you're not alone.
We know that. We really appreciate that.
If there's anything that the Gordis family needs, please let me know. And Valley Beth Shalom will do its best to be there for you, just like we're there for everybody that we can be. We're trying our best to keep everybody in line behind Israel. We're trying our best to support Israel in every way possible. And we wake up in our house. Blair and I watch I-24 in the morning. We go to bed watching CNN. We read Jerusalem Post and Haaretz all day long. And our hearts are broken.
Yeah.
Our hearts are broken.
We appreciate that. We know how supportive you are. Thank God the Gordis family is fine and doesn't really need anything. We need the same thing that every Israeli needs. We need our boys and girls to come home. We need them to come home whole in body and whole in spirit. We need them to raise their children. All the children are with the grandparents now because the parents are out at war. And it's heartbreaking and it's frightening. And the level of dread here is so deep, I can't begin to describe. Unfortunately, as generous and offer, and I know how genuine it is, there's nothing the Valley of Shalom can do about that. But we feel the support and we feel the prayer. And if there were more rabbis like you, Nolan, out there, it would even be a better situation now than it is. And it would be a much better situation than it normally is. So we're grateful to you for the model that you represent in terms of understanding Israel, caring about Israel, and in a thoughtful and a sophisticated and intellectual kind of a way. It's not a, I grew up in it. I'll date myself. It's not a Baltimore Colts game. I know they're not there anymore. Don't worry. But, it's not that. It's not a rah, my team, that thing. It's much deeper than that. And you understand that. You always have. That's why I've always valued our relationship and our conversations. So I appreciate the offer. We thank God are okay, but we need to win. And then we need to bring the boys and girls home so they can be the moms and the dads that you're supposed to be.